It's time to make cities great again. We talk about society and we talk about civilization. We talk about Western civilization. And there's an incredible amount of rural areas in the United States. I love them. I love small town America. But there's something about cities. The purpose of civilization is to create cities. Cities are an expression of your civilization. And I'm not talking about our cities as the way they are. I'm talking about our cities as the way they were. What is history if not the history of cities? Moscow, Rome, London, Washington, D.C. Today, Hollywood, Silicon Valley, Palo Alto, if you want the actual city name. Cities are the backbone of your economic powerhouses and your power bases for every country. New York City. Everyone knows this. This is how it works. And you need, of course, all of the other areas as well for your country to be able to run. But if your cities are in a state of collapse, if your cities are in a state of disarray, then your country is in disarray. And so I talked about a tactical retreat physically. When we used to say get out of cities, I meant that in terms of the context was 2020, and the context was cities where George Soros DAs were running rampant, crime all over the streets, violence kicking off everywhere. And so I said, yeah, get out of the cities. However, it's now time for phase two. And phase two is we take back our cities, make cities great again. I want to bring on now Kenny Cody because Kenny wrote an op-ed this weekend all about this. And in fact, it presaged the announcement from President Trump this morning. Kenny, how are you?
I'm great, Jack. How are you doing, brother?
So tell us about this op-ed. Obviously, you were focusing on DC itself, but walk us through the mechanisms and the circumstances that led to this announcement earlier today.
Well, of course, the assault of a federal official, Big Balls, as people know him as on social media and through mainstream media, getting assaulted. I think that's kind of what preempted this maneuver today and the announcement today of federal law enforcement taking over the D.C. police departments. But this is something that's been a long time coming. With the increasing violence that's been going on in our nation's capital, and remember, this is where all great American monuments, the example of American excellence is existed in Washington, D.C. When foreign diplomats come here, when big business want to come here and invest within our states and our cities and throughout the rest of the country, they come to D.C. and they want to see American excellence. They want to see American tradition. And the erosion of the last 20 to 25 years from D.C. being a symbol of American greatness to now it being a city of lawlessness and crime and murder and assault. I mean, we've seen more federal staffers that have been assaulted and killed within the last few months, more than about any other time throughout American history because of the lawlessness. It isn't a associated targeted attack oftentimes. It's just the amount of crime per square mile that DC deals with on a regular basis. And it's been existed more in the last 6 months than probably any other time over the last 4 years besides 2020. Trump saw this going on. Trump continues to see the lawlessness not only in DC, but in cities like Detroit, Chicago, Los Angeles, Memphis, and other cities where violence is skyrocketing, and a precedent has to be set. This is how lawlessness is going to be eradicated. This is how lawlessness needs to be treated, and we need to make an example of Washington, D.C., make it a symbol of American greatness again. And if that's not going to happen, then these kind of maneuvers need to be done throughout America. There needs to be federal law enforcement, the National Guard, and other avenues used to establish law, safety, and sanity within our cities. Because if Democratic leadership in these cities and progressive leadership in these cities continue to advocate for defunding the police and a lack of a priority of social justice over human life continues to happen, the same thing that's happening in DC today needs to be happening in our other cities tomorrow.
And look, you talk about Washington, D.C. And by the way, so President Trump has the ability to invoke the Home Rule Act for Washington, D.C. So, of course, he can go and directly federalize the Metropolitan Police Force and in which completely legal completely. It's been on the books for 50 years. And then you go back even to the Constitution itself. Washington, D.C. has always been a federal district. However, when you talk about the federal government's ability to fight crime in other big cities, people say, "Oh, you can't do this." Excuse me. Presidents from Lincoln to Eisenhower to Nixon to Johnson all understood that the federal government has a role when crime gets out of control. When crime, that should be your bumper sticker. When crime gets out of control, the federal government has a role. We have laws from the Insurrection Act to the Organized Crime Control Act, law after law after law that are currently on the books, national emergency laws that the president has at his disposal, as well, by the way, as his ability to come in and say, if a city does not comply with these requirements, a series of new requirements, for example, then you can cut off all federal funding to that city. So there's so many ways that the president can do this. And I say this as someone who, grew up in the Philadelphia area, not far from Baltimore, not far from New York. And I've seen how these once great cities have descended into absolute abject chaos. Washington, D.C. as well. This entire, and you can name the city, and they're all in the same situation: St. Louis, Birmingham, Chicago, Detroit, etc. It's a joke. It's a national crisis, and it absolutely has to be dealt with.
Well, 100%. And I mean, look at New York City. The new mayor, well, not the new mayor yet, unfortunately, but Zohran Mamdani is literally advocating on defunding the police. He can go back and say, "Well, I didn't mean that this way. I've changed since then, whatever." But the current progressive leadership in these cities is exactly what's eroding American society. It's eroding America's once great city basis. We have got to set a precedent, and hopefully the success from this, because I know for a fact, because the DC Police Union came out today and said, "I'm glad this is happening because of the lack of leadership that this city has within its own boundaries." Now, when you have police unions coming out and saying that, I don't want to hear anything about fascism or anything else about the federal takeover when the DC Police Union is literally saying, "Please come help us. Our own leadership cannot." And that's the same thing that needs to happen in other cities. There is a lack of leadership because of the priority of social justice over human life. Now they're advocating. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, and to that point, Kenny, I want to play SOT 1 right now, guys.
Fight back until you knock the hell out of them, because it's the only language they understand. But they fought back against law enforcement last night, and they're not going to be fighting back long, because I've instructed them and told them whatever happens, they love to spit in the face of the police as the police are standing up there in uniform. They're standing and they're screaming at them an inch away from their face, and then they start spitting in their face. And I said, you tell them, you spit and we hit, and they can hit real hard. It's a disgusting thing. I've watched that for years, for 3-4 years. I've watched them. The police are standing, and they're told, don't do anything under any search. So and you can see they want to get at it. And they're standing there, and people are spitting in their face, and they're not allowed to do anything. But now they are allowed to do whatever the hell they want.
I love it. You spit, we hit. When the looting starts, the shooting starts. That's how crime gets out of control. So the police have to get in. The police have to get in before that takes place. Kenny, this is something, man, and I remember, when looking back in history, Frank Rizzo, the great Frank Rizzo of Washington, or excuse me, of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, his spirit is now looking down on Washington, D.C. You got to crack down on these thugs.
Oh, without a doubt. And that's the entire point. It's just like what we just said. Like, Trump says that the police have been disenfranchised for so long, and they have been. I mean, these progressive cities literally put police departments on the lowest spectrum of priority, the lowest spectrum of respect as they can establish. And when that happens, citizens don't respect their police departments anymore.